I know somebody in the room asked about continuing education earlier. We do have some medical professionals in the room that are seeking continuing education. If you are one of those people, you have already signed up for that. But I just wanted to give a quick announcement on that. Our continuing education is provided by Nebraska Methodist College Professional Development. If you are receiving this continuing education, please review the announcements on the screen. I'm not going to read through all of them. Another important announcement is the bathrooms are located at the end of the very long hallway on the right-hand side. So it's a little bit of a trek down there, but if you're looking for those, they're all the way down the hallway on the right. I think a lot of you already visited some of the vendor tables, but if you haven't already, please take some time to visit the vendor tables. They're here for you today, and there are a couple breaks throughout the day that'll allow you to do that. And last but not least, there are session evaluations for each of our breakout sessions. So we just ask you to complete those. If I could have somebody in the back corner actually grab that stack and just start passing it. You don't have to walk around, but just take one and pass it. I meant to do that when I came in. They're pretty short. Just wait till the end, of course. And then there's a tray at the back there that has a session evaluation sign, and you can just place them in there. There are a couple extra pens in your bags, as well as some pens on that back table if you're looking for an extra one. Does anybody have any questions before we get started? All right, well, welcome to You're a Survivor, Now What? This is a panel discussion with 3 wonderful women, and I'm gonna allow them to do a little bit of their own introductions, but before they do their own introductions, I'll give a little bit of a more formal introduction for each of them. First, we have Sally. Sally Lindenberger started working in radiation oncology in 2010. Her husband was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia in 2013, and he passed away just 5 months later. Sally has devoted herself to helping patients with cancer and their families through her work at a cancer center and her partnership with A Time to Heal. Thanks for joining us, Sally. Next to Sally, we have Mary Robinson. Mary was diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia in 2014. A relapse in 2017 determined that an allogenic stem cell transplant was the only option for long-term survival. Mary is the author of Seed, Stem, Bloom, Lessons from My Faith-Led Journey Through Cancer, which officially published last week. She does have copies of that at our registration table. And lastly, but not least, we have Dr. Jane Cargus. Jane is a clinical psychologist with Nebraska Cancer Specialists. She earned her doctorate in clinical psychology. Dr. Cargus works with cancer patients, helping them navigate the complex journey of a cancer diagnosis. My name is Kelly Mand. If I haven't met you yet, I am the Director of Programs with A Time to Heal, and I will be moderating today's session. I am privileged to be joined with 3 wonderful panelists who are very familiar with this journey that you find yourself on. So at this time, I'd like each of our panelists to do a little bit of an introduction. I know I already stole the thunder with my introductions, but if you have anything else that you'd like to say, we can go backwards and start with Jane. Jane, do you have any thoughts on kind of what brought you to your role at Nebraska Cancer Specialists?
Good morning, everybody. Well, my very dear friend Lori Wingeter was at Nebraska Cancer Specialists prior to my coming, and we had worked together before. And she's also here today and will be presenting. But she was really wanting to continue working together, and she recruited me to Nebraska Cancer Specialists. And while I haven't had a personal journey of cancer, both my parents and several family members have succumbed to cancer, and it was a very, very difficult and emotional journey for all of us. So I just have a heart for people who are struggling with cancer, and certainly our patients that we see, I've learned so much from them, and it's just been an incredible journey to work with them and kind of help them with hoping and coping both. And so it's wonderful to work with people who are struggling on this level, because it's a very, very difficult road, as all of you know, from either being a caregiver or a cancer patient or someone who knows a cancer patient. So it affects the entire family, and so we're often involved with the family as well. And so, yeah, that's just a little bit about me.
Mary, maybe you can give a little bit about your journey, just a brief introduction to start us off.
Okay. My name's Mary Robinson, and I'm a teacher of the visually impaired and an orientation and mobility specialist. However, I took this last year off so I could finish my book. I guess, honestly, when I was first diagnosed, I was 38 years old, and I didn't think that anything like that could happen to me. I was, living a full life. I have 4 children and a husband. We live in the country. I was teaching full time. I was working on a passion project that took 3 years to complete. I was writing grants, presenting to groups, raising $180,000. I just thought, how in the world could this be happening when the grand opening of the sensory courtyard was going to start? And I just, it was mind-boggling, because we didn't have cancer in my family. Researchers and doctors don't know what causes leukemia. In my case, I do kind of wonder a little bit about whether or not I was just on the high end of stress. I was a very busy person and lived a hectic life. And I think that the first bout of cancer made me reflect on, some of my life choices and forced me to stop, to reevaluate what's important to me. And then the doctors didn't think it would come back because I had good cytogenetics. So at a routine checkup 2.5 years later, I find out that I had a relapse, and I was like, I feel fine. Before I was sick when they found out, but I was like, there's just no way, but that's the way it was. And so unfortunately, I was at Methodist at first, and I just loved that place. I loved all the staff, the doctors, the nurses, the custodians, everybody. And I was really sad when I was told that I needed to go to a different facility that was fit for allogeneic stem cell transplants, because that was my long-term survival and cure. And so, my doctor, Dr. Hike at the time, referred me to the best doctor ever, Dr. Bott at Nebraska Medicine. And I had a really great experience there too. But the reason why I could have switched after I went into remission and done things at Methodist until the stem cell transplant, but I chose to go there right away so that the doctors and nurses would know that I was a fighter. I needed them to know who I was. And so I'm here today, and I'm cured, and I'm super happy to be with you today. Amen. Thank God.
I'm Sally Lindenberger, and I had been a nurse in intensive care and interventional radiology, and my son was 6, I believe, at the time, and I was working nights and felt like I was missing out on a lot of him growing up. And so the opportunity in the cancer center came up, and moved to the cancer center. I wondered at the time, what I was thinking, but within 3 years, my husband was diagnosed with, and like you said, very, very sick. He was life flighted from North Platte to the med center, and God gave us 5 months to get through. When you're in your 40s, I used to joke with all my friends at work, I'm going to be the little old lady that doesn't know who I owe money to, what banks I have money in, right? And there I was at 45, wondering as he's on the ventilator, I don't know who I owe money to. I don't know where I have money at. But because of where I worked, those people understood, because when I went down, I didn't go back home for 6 weeks. And I had a 13-year-old son at the time. So thankfully, family members stepped up for me and, brought us medications and clothing. And then school started He was going into his freshman year of high school. My dad came and got him, took him back. So the support services, yeah, you know, the nurses all ask you, and the social workers ask you, what kind of support system do you have? You really have to have a great support system around you. And I'll tell you what, if there's any social workers in this room, I'll tell you what, I don't know what I would have done without her. So it just helped me to learn, I don't know if I want to say the system, but kind of, right? And so I can't imagine working anywhere else. I mean, by God's grace, we don't, out in the western part of the state, treat acute myeloid leukemia because it takes inpatient, you know, care for like a week at a time. And so I don't work with that day in, day out. Plus I do radiation. We don't treat leukemia, but watching patients, so where I live, there's one hospital, there's one cancer center, right? We have 2 waiting rooms, one on each side of the building. But watching patients come in and the camaraderie that builds between them, they don't know each other, but they know there's this common ground, and watching them bond and chat with each other and build that. And they get to where, especially with radiation, you know, they're coming in well, where's so-and-so? Did they finish? Are they okay? Well, I'm HIPAA bound, right? I can't say anything, but it's amazing. And the warrior in all of you and everybody that I deal with inspires me daily. I started teaching with A Time to Heal back in 2011, and every class that I teach, and I'm so thankful because where I'm at, getting people to drive 2 hours for a support group once a week, not going to happen, right? I don't blame them. Who wants to drive after dark when they're out in their combines and what have you? So I love that COVID brought that about. Yeah, I choke on that word a little bit, COVID, right? But it's really helped our patients. It's helped. I've been able to meet people from Canada and North Carolina and Florida that I would have not met otherwise. And every single patient that they let me touch their lives, my life becomes more and more enriched. And I just, oh my gosh, you guys, I'm just inspired every day. So that's why I'm here.
Thank you. We do have some questions prepared for this panel discussion, but I do invite this to be an open discussion. I know that can be intimidating. It's a little bit bigger of a room, maybe medium size. But I'm going to be asking each of our panelists some different questions throughout the session this morning. But please, 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 I encourage you to be brave and raise your hand. If you have a question, we will ask the audience for questions throughout. If it comes up based on what somebody says at one point, please interrupt us and ask the question. We invite this to be informal and based on the questions that you guys have. I will get started with our first question, but please be thinking. I'm going to start with Sally, even though she just got done talking. So Sally, maybe you could share something that you learned during your cancer journey as a caregiver.
Like I said, learning how important support system is around you, family members. As a caregiver, my spouse's family members questioned me and some of the decisions that I had made. They were from Denver. We shipped to Nebraska Medical Center. And so I got a lot of questions about, why would you not ship to Denver? It's better there. No, these guys are world renowned. Come on. But, just having open communication with family members to kind of bring them on board, walk them through the hard stuff. We want to be so tough, so self-sufficient in taking care of our loved one. I don't know if we perceive it as a weakness or we're afraid we're going to be perceived as weak if we ask for help. But I'll tell you what, you can be drowning. I had a 13, 14-year-old child at home, and keeping the house clean, you know, keeping him fed, getting him transported to appointments, my husband, sorry, making sure my son had lunch money at school and getting him to school every day because he's not driving at 14, right? I don't know that it's a bad thing to tell people that are close to you. I mean, don't put it on Facebook or whatever, but, tell those people that are close to you what's happening. I'm drowning. All right, now that you've done that, now accepting help. That's hard. It's very hard. People like to say to you, if you need anything, call me. I'm not going to reach out to people. Right. You're not going to reach out. So I went to a seminar that was put on by a woman who had been widowed twice. Gosh, I can't imagine. But she said that she had somebody step up in her life and said, listen, I'm going to be at your house on Saturday morning at 9 a.m. I'm going to give you 3 hours. I want you to have a list of things for me to do. She said, that I could do. Somebody gave me a task, not this open-ended thing. So I've tried to take from that now when I give back to, okay, I'm going to give you this many hours. What can, make a list of things that I can do for you. So, support, asking for help, super hard. Accepting help, super hard. But start with easy things, I guess. My social worker, if any of you knew Nan Hines from North Platte, she's retired now, I miss her, but she said, Sally, think of things like, what about mowing your lawn? Okay, I could let go of that. I can let somebody mow my lawn. Things like that you could give up. That's probably the biggest thing that I learned as a caregiver.
Mary or Jane, do you have any other specific ways that you asked for help or you encourage your patients to ask for help based on what Sally was saying, the open-ended question, how can I help? Are there tangible suggestions that you guys have?
Well, for me, just like you said, when people are like, oh, I'd love to help, just let me know. I'm very independent, and I was used to doing things on my own, and so I didn't want to burden anybody. So I was so grateful. One of my friends just did it. She started a Take Them a Meal. It's at takeemammeal.com. And 3 times a week, she had meals come to our home. I was in the hospital for several weeks at a time, sometimes just a week at a time, on multiple occasions. And we had 4 young children at the time. And my husband was with me as much as he could be at the hospital. So for him to come home to a meal and our children to have something nutritious was just incredible. So we didn't have to worry about anything, actually. My friend made sure that it would get to our home. My kids were in sports, soccer practice, all that. My friends just totally did everything for us. And I started accepting it because it was hard at first. I didn't want to make their lives more difficult. And so, but they want to help. That's the thing. People want to help, and we need to be willing to let them. Another friend started a GoFundMe page to help with medical costs. I didn't even ask for it. She just did it. And I'm telling you, people were more than willing to help out. Those are just some examples. I mean, I could go on. So do you have anything to add about that?
Yeah, I think being Nebraskans, we're very used to being very independent people, and the whole issue of asking for help, that I see that with my patients all the time, and it's difficult to overcome, but I would just echo what they're saying, that if you can just break through that and let people help you. The thing is that people love to help, and so if you're not letting them help you, you're really depriving them of something that is really rewarding for them. They want to, and so I think we just need to keep that in mind. I was born and raised on a farm, 2.5 hours northwest of here, and my dad had a heart attack, and it was right in planting time, and I will never, ever forget every neighbor, all the women, all the men, all the children came to our farm day after day after day. They got my dad's planting done. The women, typically back then it was always the women bringing the food. And it was just unlike anything I've ever seen. Just like hundreds of people from our community and from our church. And even the children were out, chopping weeds, musk thistles. So as some of you probably are aware of that. So it was incredible. And my parents, they accepted the help. There was nothing that they could do, really. My dad was in the hospital, and he had to have surgery. And so, it just really stood as a testament to how much people love to help. And it is really heartwarming for them, and if you can accept it, also for you. So I just encourage you about the help. And also, if you can have a specific list, I mean, being on the farm, the guys just knew what needed to be done, and they just did it. But if there are specific things, make a list. And when people say, well, is there anything I can do? Tell them, yes. And that is really helpful, too, because people typically don't know what to do. So.
Thanks, Jane. Mary, this next question is for you. What is one thing that you learned? Actually, that was my last question. Sorry. My next question is, what do you know now that you wish you knew when you were first diagnosed?
Oh gosh, I know. And I'm sure I had an answer that's really, really good in here. However, you're going all over the place.
Oh. It's the second question.
Oh, is it? Is it really? Oh, okay. What do I know now that I didn't know? Okay. Actually, I feel like this is super important because I was a person that did not think cancer was going to ever come across my radar. So you have to see the can in cancer. You just have to. You have to stay positive, and you have to find a reason to fight. That was my biggest thing because I just thought to myself, my gosh, I'm 38. I've got got my children. I've got my whole life ahead of me, and it just made me reprioritize my life. And I needed to know that God was with me in every battle. And I think, for me anyway, my faith grew stronger going through all this, and I relied on God more than ever to get through it. Sometimes when you have darkness around you, it's hard to see the light, and just finding those signs that God is with you just helped me tremendously. I had so many miracles along the way, and I just held on to hope, and I trusted in God. So I guess that's my main thing.
Thanks, Mary. Does anybody have any questions at this time? I'm going to open it up to see if there are any brave souls out there. Otherwise, I will keep asking my questions.
Come on, brave souls.
Well, I'll just say, though, you guys touched on it earlier that, because it was hard, like in the beginning, when people would ask, or they would always say, and I was guilty of it before this, saying, oh, just let me know if you need anything. So now when people are like, what's one thing you learned? I would always say, don't ever say that to someone. To say, this is what I'm going to do. Would Tuesday or Thursday work out better for me to drop? You touched on that before. That's one thing I tell people, like, and it doesn't matter if it's cancer,
Right.
Or something else that, because at first, people in church be like, oh, can I bring over a meal? I'm like, oh, no, I'm okay. And my husband would be like, well, why don't you say yes? Or what, so then I had to learn to start saying yes.
Thank you. Yeah.
And then I did have a question for Mary, like, when you were saying, because this is what I think of, like, how did you deal with, like, relapse? Because that's always, like, the fear, like, you get to this point and, just challenges that I've gone through along the way of, like, okay, now you have to have this surgery, and then this, and then when you go to, like, your scans and stuff, how did you deal, like, with the relapse and having to go through it again?
I'll just repeat the question just to make sure everybody heard. And the question was just dealing, Mary, with the relapse and how to deal with that, and perhaps the anxiety around some of those tests and scans and upcoming treatment again.
Well, to tell you the truth, since I felt so well the second time, I just honestly was just in denial a little bit, just because I thought, how could this be? And so we did another bone marrow biopsy, which confirmed it. And I have to say, I did get anxious before appointments and whatnot, just because, I mean, you know, it just, you do. But then I learned that no matter how I feel before an appointment, it's not going to change my blood results. So I had to let that go. Yes, I cried. Yes, I sobbed in my mom's arms, and I was like, oh, I have to do it again. But I was willing. I wanted to live. You know, I had a choice. A lot of people are killed in accidents every day, and I had a choice. So I chose life.
Thanks,
I
Mary.
hope that answers it.
Anybody else with any questions? One of the other questions that we have here, and I'll start with Jane. As a medical professional in the cancer world, do you have any tried or true organizations or resources, this is not a plug for A Time to Heal, that you always seem to refer people to? Any support groups or online resources that you're able to touch on?
Yes. The one of the organizations I love is it's cancer.net, and now I'm probably going to ASCO, the American Society of Clinical Oncology,
Yep.
and through them, cancer.net works through that organization, and there is just so much information on those websites, and they have information about support groups and you know, living well with cancer. There's there is extensive information on caregivers in that on that website. And what I find in my work is that caregivers are really they suffer and they struggle so much. And so we are always very concerned, you know, obviously with the patient who has cancer, but also very much the caregiver, and wanting to, you know, my bias is, of course, I believe in psychotherapy with all my heart. And it's not everybody needs it, but that's the place where I feel like that's where you start. And especially if you're really struggling, you know yourself better than anybody. And, you know, depression is just an absolute natural byproduct of getting a cancer diagnosis. And there's a reactive kind of depression, we call it, which really has to do with, you know, getting the terrible news of a cancer diagnosis. It's shocking, and you go through all of the stages of grief. And, you know, none of those stages are linear, but at any rate, we just find there's so much loss with cancer. So these websites, getting back to the original question, naturally, A Time to Heal is a wonderful resource, but it really just depends on like what your needs are. So many people, and I think you touched on this about COVID, really one of the best things that has come out of COVID is online support groups. And I have worked a lot in my career. I lived in California for 25 years, and I worked a lot with the recovery community, drugs and alcohol, and am a major believer in the 12 steps and, you know, a spiritual journey through recovery. And it really applies so much to cancer recovery and healing as well as addiction. So there are, and now AA and NA and all of the 12-step programs have online groups that they're marathon groups. They're 24 hours a day. So, and I don't know of anything like that for cancer specifically, but I think it just go to one of those websites and just, you know, it really experiment, because it really has to be something that appeals to you and that touches you in some way. And that's a place where you can also get to know people. I'm not too familiar now with in-person cancer support groups, other than, A Time to Heal, obviously has the courses that they offer. But just find something that really speaks to you. And I think those two, and also be careful of online, the .com online groups. It's better to look for the .org and .net. And the American Society of Clinical Oncology is just a great, great resource. So
Thanks,
I hope that's
Jane.
helpful.
Yeah.
American Society of Clinical Oncology. Are you familiar with that one too? Yeah, I love that. And then through that, there are other resources for cancer.net. And there's a Living Beyond Breast Cancer website as well.
Thanks, Jane. Mary, the question that I have for you in relation to that is after treatment. I think a lot of survivorship resources are for in treatment. So do you have any recommendations for patients that have might be a couple years out or 5 or 10 years out of treatment for resources?
Yeah, and I know that this isn't really supposed to be a plug for A Time to Heal, but honestly, A Time to Heal was so valuable for my husband and I. Back then, I believe it was called A Time to Heal program, and now I think it's Survivorship 101. And back then it was 12 weeks, and your survivor and caregiver can go to it. And my husband and I learned so much. We felt like we had a support system. Also, I have another career now, kind of, I guess, if you want to say, because of it. So we had presenters come and see us, and they talked about nutrition, and they also had a presenter come in that was a Reiki master, and she taught us ways to calm ourselves. And you had mentioned, like, what did I do? I used those strategies, and I used guided imagery, and I use visualization. It's all in my book of different techniques that I used to help me get through it. And I became a Reiki master, and I'm a healing touch practitioner. I'm going to be certified soon. I just really, and I'm a certified herbalist. I did a 2-year program, and I also used essential oils. I mean, lots of different resources out there, but you have to talk to your doctor before you do any of that stuff. I'm just saying, I'm putting that plug out there. But guys, honestly, God put all this stuff on earth to help us. So try to utilize it and make sure it's okay with your doctor. I just had to say that. Anyway.
Sally, do you have anything to add to that? Otherwise, I can move on to another question. Does anybody have any questions from the audience? Yep.
Is there child care during those survivorship classes for, like, if parents go to those for their children?
So the question was, is there child care for the survivorship classes? Are you asking for A Time to Heal? There is not at this time. We do have virtual classes. I know that does not negate the need for childcare, but perhaps makes it easier. We have virtual classes that start every month. So they run for 9 weeks. Mary mentioned the 12 weeks. Our classes at this point are 9 weeks. And we have new ones starting every month. We also have a new pilot program. I'm not going to talk long. I'm sorry. I'm taking up time. And that's for younger cancer survivors, so under the age of 45. So if we have any medical professionals or anyone in the room that would fit that category, that's an option as well. But not for our in-person. And we actually haven't yet started our in-person, but we're looking to start that this spring. Any other questions from the audience? Yep.
I don't know how to ask it, but between... It's like when your husband was told 3 to 5 months to live. How did you handle that as, or how did he handle it? I was very fortunate. You have cancer and those suckiest words in the world, but I had high hopes. But if you don't have high hopes, how do you deal with that?
So just to repeat the question for everyone, the question was when you're dealing with a difficult prognosis of perhaps a shortened timeline, how did you deal with that, and how did you remain hopeful?
So So they never told him that. He was flown out of North Platte at 11 p.m. on a Wednesday night. My son and I went home, we packed, and we drove to Omaha, not knowing how long we would be down there. I'd only been in the cancer center for 3 years. I didn't know a lot about leukemia because we don't treat it there. I told you not to put things on Facebook. I did, though. I didn't even call my boss. I put it on Facebook that John had been diagnosed with leukemia and we were headed to Omaha. And one of the chemo nurses called me and said, "You need to prepare yourself." And I was like, "Oh, okay. 5 years, 3 years, a year?" And she's like, "Probably less." Well, the thing with acute leukemia is there are so many cellular components. There are translocations of genes. Goes way over my head. But depending on translocations and mutations, sometimes, there was a volunteer in our cancer center that had AML, and she's like 10 years out now. So they never said to him, "This is a shortened period." I tried to warn his parents that it could be, but when they didn't receive it, I just stopped. Because as a nurse, I knew too much, but I never let that on. And the doctors, I'll tell you what, even the ones that were closest to me in the cancer center, never, ever said, "This is really bad." They all said, "We're going to give this, we're going to do this, this is the outcome we're looking for." So they never, ever let the hope drop, ever. And I applaud them for that. The only time they finally gave us a timeline, do you know Dr. Manis? Did you ever meet her? So she's, what at that time was the leukemia specialist. They had gotten him into remission after the first 6-week stay. And the goal is always transplant. So you have to keep them in remission so that they can get to transplant. He recurred because of his, he actually had ALL and AML because of the translocations that he had. When he recurred, it was just before Thanksgiving. And I got a call from Dr. Manis, and she said, "There's nothing more we can do." I said, "Okay, is he going to make it to Christmas?" Probably not. So then I'm left with, okay, do I tell him that? Nah. We're going to go home and we're going to keep living this because I'm sitting next to a miracle. She knows this, but she truly is a miracle. They happen all the time, guys. Just look around. The flowers that bloom every day. This is not supposed to happen. They die over the winter, right? Things that die don't come back. Miracles happen everywhere. And I, too, didn't give up hope, really, because you never know when your miracle is going to come. So I applaud the doctors and the nurses around us that never, ever gave him that impression, ever. Because you're right, if you don't have hope, where do you go from there? There's always hope, always hope.
Thanks, Sally. I'm going to go to Jane on that note. What are some ways that you work with your patients on what Sally was talking about, maintaining hope among a difficult diagnosis, a cancer journey?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I really echo what you're saying about hope. And, we talk about coping skills a lot in therapy. I'm a very process-oriented therapist. So like I'm not a particularly cognitive behavioral therapist, but certainly when you're dealing with a cancer diagnosis, it is important to have tools. But I think hope is something that it's absolutely vital. And what we see with major depression certainly is hopelessness. And that is a very, very serious condition because Sally's right, there is always hope. So I think as a therapist, one of my jobs is to, I'm always aligning with my patient wherever they are. And if they're feeling hopeless, I don't try to talk them out of that. But what is really important is to acknowledge that I do feel this way today. And because I think we live in a culture that is in such denial about feelings and such fear about, oh, you mustn't feel down, you just be positive. And, you know, that just doesn't work with a lot of people. With some people, I suppose it does. But with my work, it's about, okay, this is the reality. You do feel that way. It's okay. It's understandable. You're not going to stay there. But building hope, it's a cognitive process. It's mental. It's emotional. And with cancer, it really is about building resilience. And, you know, I see so many patients who have had a really tough go of it. Cancer is one of many traumas in their life. It's probably the latest one and perhaps the biggest one, a life-threatening diagnosis, but they've been through so much hell already in their lives. And so their coping skills sometimes are very, very, they've been taxed to the max. And this is, again, where therapy can be so helpful, because what I try to do is provide a safe space for people to think whatever they want to think, believe whatever they want to believe, and feel whatever they're feeling. And then from that allows space then for people to really move out of that. Because and I know a lot of you have people who are saying you have to be positive, you must be positive at all times. And positivity is different than optimism, and it's different than hope. Hope is really, to me, it's we've been talking a lot about spirituality here, and I am a very firm believer that a spiritual belief system, something, and again, having worked with people in recovery, the 12 steps are all built on spiritual principles. That's how they started. And that's what gives people hope, is something bigger than yourself. And we call it a higher power. It can be God. But it can be a lot of other things too. Nature is something that gives people so much hope. And you mentioned flowers blooming. You know, being outside. And I'll get to mindfulness, which is it is just a fabulous tool for helping people be in the moment. So. The more you can be in today, and again, going back to the 12 steps, one day at a time, this journey is also one day at a time. And certainly in the beginning, it is a massive undertaking of appointments and treatments, and you feel terrible and overwhelmed. Overwhelm is probably just the biggest obstacle that I see in helping people try to just break down the day into something manageable, little manageable bits of time. And so with hope, it's kind of having the mindset that I will find something to be hopeful about. I will find something to be joyful about, because there are still things to be joyful about, even though this diagnosis is often very dire. But, you know, A Time to Heal really is all about living your best life every single day. And whether you have cancer or you're caring for someone with cancer, that hope, it does spring eternal. And there's no such thing as false hope. Hope is hope, and hope is what gets people to get up in the morning the next day. And and just to go back to these really difficult feelings of depression and anxiety, depression is a hopelessness type of ailment. I mean, it causes people to feel hopeless, and that's just a natural product of, it's one of the biggest hallmarks of major depression is hopelessness. So getting help, getting back to the whole, finding help. There are so many resources out there. And Nebraska Cancer Specialists is one of the only cancer clinics, certainly the only one in Nebraska that I know. And it seems really odd that psychotherapy and mental health services wouldn't be part of an integrated services component to any cancer clinic, but it's not. So we have in Nebraska something really, really unique. And both Lori and I, know, and again, my journey hasn't been a personal one, but through a lot of experiences with a lot of patients, we know a lot and we can really help. And then the other thing is medication. And sometimes with major depression, certainly, that is very, very necessary. And again, being Nebraskans, people are kind of, no, I'll pull myself up by my bootstraps, and that's what my mom and dad always said. And, what I say to patients is, a lot of people say it just didn't have to be this hard. And medication can really be helpful in certain instances. But again, I go with what my patient is saying, and sometimes we just wait. But I guess the hopefulness is it's something as you're going through this process, which is difficult enough physically, but you're also then called upon mentally and emotionally to, and it's not. It isn't strong in terms of like being in denial of feelings. It's really the opposite. It's embracing all of your feelings and living with them. And it's a lot easier than fighting something all the time to not be. Like, I feel sad. I feel a sense of loss. Well, of course you do. Grief is an absolute natural part of all this. The losses are tremendous with cancer. Mm-hmm. So just embracing feelings, whatever they are, negative, positive. I just prefer to call them just natural feelings. They are what they are, and let's let them be and not keep trying to, fight them and push them away. And this is what a lot of people in the life of a cancer survivor, that's what they're doing. It's like, push those away. You don't feel that way. Don't say that. Don't feel that. And that's just not helpful. So
Thanks.
Have you seen, though, a difference in the because I was diagnosed in January 2020 and then COVID happened.
Yeah.
So did you see a big difference between cancer patients prior to COVID versus going through, because there was a lot of stuff I had to go to by myself. So did you see a lot of things that maybe you had to change to help patients that had to do things on their own because their family members couldn't go? And how do you direct them? Because I'll tell you, I'm at this point when you said, I don't want to do anything virtual anymore.
Yeah.
I want to do in person.
You want to do in person. Yeah.
Virtual all the time, time for work. Yeah, and then, in person, so, I didn't know how that has changed.
Right.
How you're
I hear you.
patients because they were on a journey a lot by themselves doing versus having their family being able to be there.
Yes.
So the question for everyone in the room was dealing with a cancer diagnosis during a pandemic. I hope you're signed up for our afternoon session. We have a session on cancer during a pandemic. And Jane will be presenting at that. But I'd love to hear Jane's thoughts on kind of what you've experienced working with cancer patients before the pandemic, working with cancer patients during the pandemic, and how you've seen the shift of care.
Yeah, how many hours do we have?
10 minutes.
Wow. That's a huge question and a very good question. Major differences. And of course, a lot of that has to do with the isolation of COVID. And we've talked about support systems and appointments. And it was terrible. And I'm seeing now at Nebraska Cancer Specialists that, people have their family members in there again. And it's so wonderful to see. I just went over to a patient the other day who was getting an infusion, and her husband was there holding her hand. And it was like, oh, thank God, But yes, the isolation and the depression, the level of depression and anxiety was like nothing I had ever seen before. And across the country, and I would guess probably across the world, mental health professionals are completely booked. I mean, there are no appointments to be had. You have to wait, 2 or 3 months. People aren't taking new patients. So getting help is also very challenging right now from a mental health standpoint. But yes, I did see a big difference with COVID and not being with family, grandkids, and patients would just cry and cry about the loss, again, huge loss of not being able to see their family members and being so afraid of COVID. So yes, there's the cancer and everything that's going on with cancer and treatment and trying to live the best life you can and being very, very much alone. So, and again, one thing that's come out of COVID that we were able to start doing telehealth. Absolutely a lifesaver. And we hadn't really done telehealth much at all because insurance companies were very reluctant to cover it. Now, I mean, I have never seen insurance companies come to the fore so quickly as they did with COVID and say, telehealth is okay. We'll pay for it. We'll pay the copays. I mean, utterly amazing to me. So that was a real godsend that we could actually come into someone's home. It's not ideal, and it's different than being in person, as you said, but it really has made a big difference. But again, I think that just a spike in depression, anxiety, overwhelm from, again, those huge losses of not being around your support system because you're too afraid of getting COVID. And then, of course, the whole vaxxed, not vaxxed issue. Yeah, go ahead. Culture.
When you go to a therapist, you want a therapist that looks and thinks like you.
Mm-hmm.
So during the COVID situation, I was going through some things, and I was working with them, my network with my insurance. And they keep giving me these therapists. I said, nope, I'm not going to these people. They're not black. I'm not playing this game.
Right.
It ain't happening. I did it before. It's not happening again. And the insurance company worked with me and helped me find a black therapist that I can identify with. And that is something that has not been said at all. We need people in these organizations, in these structures, in these systems that has everything, and it's going to be talked about later on today, is diversity and inclusion.
Yes.
So that is also key for American Indians, African Americans, Latino, all of us. Need someone else that we can identify with, that will understand our culture, and some of the things that we are going on in ourselves internally as well.
That's such a great point. Did you want to?
Yeah. So I'll just repeat, because we are recording today, just to make sure that that's heard. But we just had a comment from the audience just about the importance of representation, culture, specific to accessing healthcare, accessing therapy services, finding people that look and think and feel like you and grew up with similar circumstances. So I don't have a specific question out of that comment unless anyone at the table wants to share anything. Otherwise, we just have a few minutes, so I'll open the floor up if there are any additional questions to end on. It looks like we have one.
Hi, I think it was, I'm terrible on names, so Sally, maybe Sally? Yeah. You said something about caregivers' website.
It was
Jane.
That's okay.
I answer to anything.
Whatever your name is.
Exactly.
I'm a doctor.
Jane will suffice.
Okay, I know you mentioned on the internet, CancerNet, is that what you said?
Cancer.net is one.
Right after that, you said another one, and I was trying to write it down.
Yes, American Society of Clinical Oncology, which is closely aligned with cancer.net. And then also the National Coalition for Cancer Survivors. National Coalition for Cancer Survivors. And I believe it was on that where I found a lot of information on caregivers, care for caregivers.
And then, the last part of, all of you all are doing a great job, but the last part of, you mentioned, I think you said UNMC has a good, holistic approach to being a cancer patient. And then
Actually, it's
a lot of them don't, but
Nebraska Cancer Specialists. That's where I practice. And we have, it's called Integrative Oncology Services. And so it's mental health, it's PT, OT, we offer yoga, Tai Chi, just very mind-body medicine.
and then where is this? Is it on the campus of UNMC?
No, it's a group of private practice physicians, oncologists, and there are about 5 locations now. That we even have a location in Grand Island. Mm-hmm.
If we give you our name and our address or something, is there a way that we can get that information, where you go exactly, or who you call?
You mean for psychotherapy?
Well, just
Or
find out what you
just
don't
find,
know.
just go on the website, Nebraska Cancer Specialists. So it's NCS, Nebraska Cancer Specialists. And you'll see
NCS is.
.com.
And in
Yeah.
fairness, there's a lot of, even my little tiny cancer center in North Platte has, even my little tiny center in North Platte has PT and OT right there in it. They offer yoga classes. So there's going to be a lot of centers, not to take, and by no means, because I don't know anything about it, but she works there, so it's got to be awesome, right? I'm just saying, but that's kind of where cancer care has gone, is to a much more holistic type. They look at all of the components, the body, mind, and spirit, all of it. So. Yes. Thankfully. I mean, it's been it's like turn of the Titanic, right? It's taken a long time to get us there, but again, I live out in the middle of nowhere, and so for us to have come on board with that is a huge thing. So.
Yeah, go ahead, Mary.
Can I just say something real quick, just because I thought of it? Another really awesome opportunity that I did was from First Descents, and it was after my treatments were over, and it's called Outliving Life, and I went on a kayaking trip. There's either ice climbing, surfing, kayaking, or rock climbing, but I chose kayaking, and it was remarkable. It was a week-long thing. I did have to... Yeah, Outliving Life. It's from First Descents. They're based out of Colorado. I actually found out about them through one of your guys' annual conferences one year, and I was like, I'm going to sign up now. And so I asked my doctor and got the approval, but it's very simple to do. They pay for everything, the food, the housing for the week, and then our trip. You get to pick wherever you want to go. And then also, you do have to pay for your flight, though, unless they offer scholarships for that. And then I think that's all I really wanted to say.
Thanks, Mary.
Casting for Recovery has a booth here today, and that's another.
Oh, casting. Did you say casting for recovery?
So the comment was that Casting for Recovery, they do fly fishing trips. They're a vendor today, similar type of an organization. Did you have a question?
What is she saying? Descent.
First Descents.
Can you spell that?
It's DESCENTS. And then it's Outliving Life. Now they do have an age range, and don't quote me. I think 44 at the time. I don't remember. Maybe I was younger. Anyway, I don't even know how old I am today. But anyway, they I think go up to 49. But definitely check it out. I went to Massachusetts, guys. It was so much fun.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Have the second Cast to Recover.
Cast to yeah.
St. Benedict's, just being there.
Yeah.
They have a little pond out there, and those women are the only ones allowed to fish.
Okay. Yeah.
You don't have to be a fisherman.
So lots of love in the audience for casting for recovery. Cast for recovery. We are at time. Oh, the comment was that you don't have to know how to fish to go. For sake of time, we are going to close. I'm sorry that we didn't get to more questions, but I appreciate each of you on the panelists for joining us today. And thank you guys for joining us. We do have a short break right now. The next session that will be in this room is the surviving side effects. This is the biggest room. In our breakouts, the other two rooms, if you're in a different session, are just directly down this hallway on the left. So you're going to go down there if you're in the diversity and inclusion talk. That's going to be the second room, and the first room is the impact of cancer on young families. So thank you all for joining us today.